Before the bobcat, before the storm and the frozen lake, there was just an old nurse on a ridge and the sound of her own breathing in a very quiet house. Up in northern Minnesota, where winter seems to sit a little heavier on the shoulders, there's a narrow road that climbs to a small clapboard building with a faded green sign, Ridge Outpost Clinic. It's not much more than one exam room, a tiny waiting area, and a kitchen that smells faintly of coffee and pine cleaner. That's where Evelyn Hart lives and works. The mountain people around her just call her Nurse Ev. Most mornings start the same way. She wakes before the sun, not because she has to, but because years of night shifts never really washed out of her bones. Kettle on, 2 mugs on the counter. She still does that. Puts both down side by side, the way she used to when her husband was alive. Then she quietly returns one to the cupboard. The remaining mug is hers. Black coffee, no sugar. The way you drink it when you've learned to save sweetness for other parts of the day. She moves through the clinic in soft house shoes, checking beds that have been empty for days, straightening sheets that already sit smooth. Her hands are steady, even now. You can see the history on them. The fine lines, the raised veins, the way the fingers still curl naturally, like they're ready to hold a wrist and count a pulse. On the wall, there's an old photograph from another life. A crowded city hospital, bright white uniforms, a younger Evelyn laughing with a group of nurses. She pauses in front of it most mornings. Not long, just enough to notice how different her hands look now from the ones gripping the chart in that picture. Outside the window, the ridge falls away to a small frozen lake. The surface is dull white today, snow pressed flat by wind. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a bobcat might be moving through the brush right now. But she doesn't know that yet. To her, it's just another January morning with the sky the color of tin, and a day she expects to spend mostly alone. Her phone buzzes on the counter. A voicemail from her daughter in Seattle, checking in. "Mom, when are you going to let someone else be the town nurse and come live near us?" Evelyn listens, smiles, but doesn't reply yet. She hits save. There's love in the message, and worry, and a quiet misunderstanding she hasn't found words for. Because out here, even when the days are empty, she is still the one people call. There's a knock at the side door. Caleb from down the hill steps in, stamping snow off his boots, holding a loaf of bread wrapped in a dish towel. "Morning, Nurse Ev," he says, "just making sure our Ridge Guardian's still kicking." He says it lightly, but you can hear what it means. She may feel forgotten by the bigger world, but to this small place, she is the person you hope is home when the chest pain starts, or the cough won't quit. She logs his blood pressure while they talk about the snowplow schedule and the frozen mailboxes. It's nothing dramatic, just a quick check, a small joke, a promise to call if the weather turns worse. Then the door closes, and the house is quiet again. You can almost hear the building breathe with her. For a lot of people her age, purpose shifts to hobbies, church groups, maybe travel when the joints allow it. For Evelyn, it's still measured in heartbeats and oxygen levels, in the way she can hear a wheeze and know exactly what to reach for. It's a different kind of retirement, one where you don't really retire at all. That morning, she stands at the window with her coffee, fogs the glass with a long exhale, and wipes a small circle clear with the heel of her hand. The lake stares back at her, quiet and sealed under ice. She has no idea that soon she'll walk across it, and that a small wildlife will reach up from beneath that ice and change the way she understands her own. Stay with her a little longer. In the next part of this bobcat story, we'll follow Evelyn down to that frozen lake, into the storm and into the moment when the silence under her feet suddenly starts to scratch back. By mid-morning, the storm had done what storms always do on the ridge, shouted all night, then left the world oddly peaceful. Like a room after an argument, snow lay heavy on the pines below the clinic. The little frozen lake, the one Evelyn could see from her kitchen window, was now just a white sheet tucked under the sky. No ripples, no color, just a flat, quiet field of ice. That's when the landline rang. It was Mrs. Olson from the far side of the lake trail, her voice thin and crackling. Her husband's chest was tight again, breathing shallow, the way it gets when the cold sinks too deep into his lungs. The road hadn't been plowed yet. Their old truck wasn't going anywhere. Evelyn listened, nodded, even though no one could see her, and said what she said 100 times before.
"All right. Stay with him. I'm coming."
She knew the long road was blocked. The only way was the old footpath that cut across the frozen lake and into the trees. She'd crossed it many winters, back when her knees didn't speak up so loud. Today, she pulled on her boots more slowly, wrapped a scarf twice around her neck, and slung the medical bag over her shoulder. Out on the ridge, the air had that sharp, clean bite only people who've lived through real winters recognize. Each breath felt like a small agreement with the cold. In, out, I'm still here. She stepped onto the lake carefully, testing each patch of snow with the poles she carried. The ice made those faint, hollow sounds it makes in deep winter, the kind that remind you there is water and darkness not so far below your feet. She moved steadily, not fast, but with the practiced rhythm of someone who's walked toward other people's emergencies her whole life. Halfway across, in the middle of all that silence, she heard it. At first, it was just a scratch, a thin, weak sound somewhere behind her. She stopped. The lake was empty. The trees were still. She took another step. There it was again, a scraping, then a small choked noise that cut right through the blanket of snow-muffled quiet. She knelt, one gloved hand pressed flat to the ice. Beneath a narrow, jagged crack, something moved. She leaned closer, angling her face to catch what little light there was, and that's when she saw it. A young bobcat, hind legs sunk into black water, forepaws hooked desperately to a shard of ice, chest heaving. Wild eyes, wild fear. The kind of fear she'd seen in human faces too, in emergency rooms and car accidents and long nights on the ward. For a moment, she didn't move.
"This is a wild animal, not a house cat,"
she whispered to herself, the way you might say,
"This is fire, not candlelight."
A memory flashed quickly, a wildlife officer years ago telling her over the phone, "If you ever find something hurt out there, call us. Don't put yourself in danger." Out here, though, the signal was thin and the minutes were short. The bobcat's claws scraped weakly at the cracking edge. Its breath came in small, panicked bursts. She could feel its life thinning out under the ice. She made a choice the way she's always made choices on the ridge, weighing risk, weighing time, listening to that old, stubborn part of herself that still believes in stepping toward suffering, not away from it. Evelyn slid her folded rescue sledge from the bag, looped a strap through the front handle, and lay flat on the ice to spread her weight. Inch by inch, she pushed the sledge toward the crack, talking in that low, even tone she used with frightened patience. "I've got you. Easy now. Keep holding on." The bobcat's paws slipped onto the slick plastic. She pulled gently, using the pole as a lever, feeling the ice compress beneath her chest. Cold seeped through her coat, her shoulders burned. For each pull, she matched her breath to its ragged gasps. Then, suddenly, there they were, both of them on thicker ice, the animal wrapped in the rattling silver of an emergency blanket, fur dripping, body trembling against her. It was heavier than it looked. Its heart hammered against her arm, quick and wild. She held it closer, surprised at the familiar weight. It wasn't so different from the nights she'd carried feverish toddlers down long hallways or helped old men sit up when their lungs filled with fluid. A different body, same calling. We pause here for a heartbeat on that frozen lake. An old nurse, a wild bobcat, the cold pressing in on all sides, and one fragile, shared decision to keep going. In the next part, we'll follow them back up the ridge into the small clinic that's about to become something else. A place where a wild heart and a tired one will learn to breathe under the same roof. If this moment on the ice stirs something in you, stay close. The real healing in this story hasn't even begun yet. The strange thing about that morning is how ordinary the room looked when Evelyn first stepped back inside, carrying Winter in her arms. She pushed the clinic door shut with her shoulder, snow still clinging to her boots, and laid the bundled bobcat on the floor just inside, so the warmth could begin to work. The house had that familiar outpost smell. Old coffee, clean gauze, a hint of pine cleaner, and now wet fur and cold metal from the emergency blanket. This is the part of the story most people never see. Not the dramatic rescue on the frozen lake, but the quiet, careful hours after. The first 72 hours, when a wild life and a human life are suddenly sharing the same air. Evelyn, she cleared a corner of the storage room off the exam space, the one that held extra blankets and boxes of gloves. On the bottom shelf sat an old wire crate left behind by a search and rescue volunteer who used to bring his dog up on weekends. She pulled it out, lined it with towels, and slid a hot water bottle under one side to create a warm pocket the bobcat could choose or avoid. Before she did anything else, she reached for the phone. The rehab center, 3 towns over, picked up on the second ring. Evelyn explained what she'd found on the frozen lake, what she'd done, and what the roads looked like. The wildlife tech on duty listened, asked a few questions, and gave clear advice. Keep the bobcat warm, limit handling, offer water, watch for signs of shock. As soon as the plows cut a path, they'd send someone up, or she could bring the animal down. It mattered to her to hear that voice on the line, to know she wasn't doing this alone, and to make sure anyone who ever heard this story would understand. Bobcats are wild. They're not meant to be pets. Most of the time, the right thing is to call the people who do this for a living. Back in the storage room, she knelt beside the bundle on the floor. With slow hands, she peeled back the metallic blanket. The young bobcat lay there, fur spiked with half-melted ice, sides rising in quick, shallow breaths. Its paws twitched weakly. Eyes half open, gold washed out to a dull amber. "Easy," she murmured, more to herself than to the animal. "We're inside now." She dried its fur in small sections with soft cloths, working from chest to tail, keeping the motion gentle but firm, the way she used to change linens under patients without jostling them. Every so often, the bobcat gave a faint hiss, not strong enough to be a threat, just a reminder of what it was. Wild, afraid, still choosing to stay alive. Day 1 was mostly about survival. She checked its breathing every hour, counted the beats under her fingertips, and watched the color creep back into its gums. When she offered a shallow dish of water, the bobcat barely reacted. That was all right. She'd waited out stubborn patients before. She could wait out this one. By the second day, something had shifted. The breathing deepened, smoothed out. When she opened the crate door a crack to change the towels, the bobcat lifted its head, ears flattening, eyes clearer now. It didn't lunge, didn't try to escape. I just watched her. That look stayed with her all afternoon. She found herself standing at the clinic sink, hands plunged into soapy water, realizing she was washing the same towel for the 3rd time, just so she didn't have to walk too far from that room. On the 3rd morning, she found the dish of water half emptied. A few scraps of food are gone. Small signs, but to someone who has walked families through long recoveries, tiny changes can feel like fireworks. She decided to give the bobcat a name in her mind, just to have something to call it when she checked on it. Copper, she thought, because of that faint reddish tint on its ears when the light hit just right. She never said it out loud. Names can make things feel like they belong to you, and this animal didn't. Still, each time she knelt by the crate, she whispered updates like she was charting on a human patient. Breathing stronger, coat drying out nicely, still feisty. Somewhere between those comments, a different kind of healing was happening too, as her hands repeated all the old motions she'd used in big city hospitals, lifting, checking, warming. A part of her that had gone quiet on the ridge woke up again. The part that knew, with bone-deep certainty, I know what to do. I am still needed. If you've ever spent days caring for someone or something that can't say thank you, you know that feeling. It's exhausting and strangely holy at the same time. We'll leave them there for a moment. A tired nurse and a recovering bobcat. Winter pressed up against the windows. 2 hearts slowly settling into the same rhythm. In the next part, we'll linger in that rhythm a little longer and see how those first 72 hours stretch into days, How sharing a small clinic with a wild creature starts to change the way Evelyn moves through every room. If you're finding a bit of your own life in her quiet routines, stay with this story. The bond between them is only just beginning to show itself. If you had driven past the Ridge Outpost Clinic in those weeks, you wouldn't have known that a bobcat was sleeping 20 feet from the blood pressure cuff. From the outside, nothing much changed. Snow still piled up against the steps. The faded sign still creaked on its rusted chain. The porch light still went on at dusk and off at dawn. But inside, the rhythm of the place shifted just a little to make room for a second heartbeat. By the end of the first week, the crisis had eased. Copper was no longer a bundle of wet fur wrapped in a silver blanket. The breathing was steady, deep. The eyes were clear and alert. The wildness was still there, but now it had energy behind it. Evelyn adjusted her days around that crate in the storage room without really deciding to. She'd start each morning with coffee, then check the clinic voicemail, then her feet would carry her down the short hall before anything else. She'd kneel, thumb resting lightly against the metal bars, watching for the small signs that told her how the day might go. On day 7, the bobcat stood fully for the first time, paws planted, shoulders rising and falling under that spotted coat. It took a few slow steps, turned, and looked straight at her. Not a soft look, not grateful, just present, awake. She caught herself holding her breath, like she used to do when a patient took their first steps after surgery, waiting to make sure the legs would hold. When she finally exhaled, it came out as a quiet laugh she didn't expect. Outside, the ridge was holding its own kind of stillness. Snow hung heavy in the pine branches, bending them into slow arcs. When the wind moved through, you could hear the trees shiver. At night, those sounds carried into the clinic. Creaks, soft thumps, the low hum of winter settling deeper. Each time the building sighed, Copper's ears twitched. Evelyn started to hear the place as he might. Every noise a question, every quiet a chance to rest. Caleb dropped by one afternoon with a bag of canned soup and a stack of mail. "Brought provisions for you and your guest," he said, eyeing the crate. Evelyn explained, briefly, that she was following the rehab center's instructions, that this was temporary, that Copper would go back to the wild as soon as he was strong enough and the roads allowed. She was careful with every word, wanting to honor the bobcat as an animal, not a curiosity. Caleb just nodded. "If anyone was going to run a recovery room for wildlife up here, it'd be you," he said. "Ridge won't know what to do without you one day." That stuck with her long after he left. The idea that this tiny building, this quiet outpost, had become more than just a place to change bandages. It had become something like a hinge between the human world and everything just beyond the tree line. At night, when the clinic finally settled and the phone stopped ringing, she'd open her laptop and try to write to Rosie. The cursor blinked on an empty screen while she searched for words that would make sense to someone whose winters were mostly lived under city streetlights.
Dear Rosie,
She typed once.
this week I've been sharing my call schedule with a bobcat.
She stared at the sentence, smiled, and backspaced it away. Instead, she wrote about learning to listen again, to the wind, to her own steps on the old floorboards, to the sound of an animal breathing steadily in the next room. Sometimes she'd pause outside Copper's door, just to listen. His breath had a particular rhythm now, slow in, slower out, a soft growl of air that matched the hum of the small space heater nearby. It struck her that after a lifetime spent listening for trouble in people's lungs, she was now measuring her days by the calm of a wild one. There were still flashes of a reminder that he was not tame. Once, when she reached in to adjust the water bowl, Copper's paw shot out, claws grazing her sleeve. Not deep, just enough to say, "You're close enough." She pulled her arm back, checked her skin, and nodded. "You're right," she said softly. "We keep our distance." If you've ever shared a home with a creature you don't fully understand, an aging dog, a wary rescue cat, a spouse moving through grief, you know that balance. Close enough to care, far enough to respect their nature. As the days passed, Evelyn noticed the light changing outside. The snow on the pine branches began to sag and slide. Icicles thinned, dripping slowly in the weak sun. Winter was loosening its grip on the ridge, just a little. And with each drip, each softened edge, another question crept closer. What happens when copper no longer needs these four walls? We'll step into that question next, when the ice starts to let go and the back door of the clinic opens onto a choice. For a bobcat and for an old nurse who's grown used to another heartbeat in her house. If this quieter stretch of the story feels familiar to you, if you've ever settled into a fragile peace with someone or something you knew you couldn't keep forever, stay with us. The moment of letting go is coming, and it carries a different kind of healing. The first sign that winter was loosening its grip wasn't the temperature, it was the sound. One morning, Evelyn stood at the sink and heard it. A single drip from the eaves, then another. Out on the ridge, the frozen world had started to make small, watery sounds again, as if the ice itself were finally exhaling. Down in the storage room, Copper was pacing. Not frantically, not like a trapped animal, just testing his strength. Back and forth, muscles moving clean under that bobcat coat. When Evelyn opened the door, he stopped and looked at her, eyes steady, tail tip flicking once. This was different from the early days, when every glance had been edged with shock and fear. Now there was energy, intention, the kind of restlessness you see in a recovering patient when the bed is no longer enough. She knew this moment was coming. The rehab center had called the day before. Roads were mostly clear now. They were ready to take Copper in, evaluate him, and guide him through a controlled release. It was the safest option, the one she'd urged other people to choose when they found injured wildlife. Let the professionals do their work. Let the animal go where it truly belongs. But out here, belonging was complicated. The clinic sat right on the edge of the bobcat's natural world. The lake, the pines, the rocky outcrops where he'd once hunted, all of it lay just beyond her back door. And Copper wasn't limping anymore. He was eating, grooming, reacting exactly the way a wary, healthy wildcat should react when a human got too close. She stood in that doorway, watching him pace, and felt another doorway open inside her. One where this wasn't just about a bobcat or a set of rehab protocols. It was about every letting go she'd ever done. A daughter at 18, standing in a dorm parking lot with a cardboard box of dishes and that look in her eye that said, "I love you, but I need to see if I can do this without you hovering." A son boarding a plane with a backpack and a one-way ticket, promising to call, promising to text, and then mostly sending photos instead. A husband in a hospital bed, her fingers wrapped around his, understanding that the strongest thing she could do now was to stop asking him to stay. Those memories moved through her as she picked up the phone and called the rehab center back. She described Copper's gait, his behavior, and his environment. The tech on the other end listened carefully. "You're practically in his backyard," the voice said. "If he's moving well and acting wild, and if you feel it's right, opening that door and letting him choose isn't unreasonable. Just remember, he's not a pet. Don't expect a goodbye." She thanked them, wrote down a few last notes, and hung up. Then she did something that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with being a woman of a certain age who's lived through enough winters. She walked to the kitchen window, lit the small candle she keeps there, and set it on the sill facing the lake. "Just in case," she whispered. She wasn't sure if she meant in case he came back or in case she needed a small, steady light for herself. In the storage room, she opened the crate door first. Copper froze, every muscle listening. Then she crossed to the back of the clinic and unlatched the outer door. Cold air rolled in, carrying the smell of wet earth, old snow, and the sharp green hint of pine needles waking up. For a long moment, nothing happened, just her breath and his. She didn't call, didn't coax. She simply stepped to the side, hands loose, making as much space as she could between her body and that open frame. The bobcat moved like water, finding its path. Out of the crate, across the scuffed linoleum, onto the wooden threshold. He paused, with one paw hanging over the step, nostrils flaring, eyes on the tree line. Then, with a single smooth motion, he slipped into the light and was gone, swallowed by the brush, by the slope of the ridge, by the world that had always been his. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything they had shared. The long nights, the careful breaths, the way her hands had remembered what they were made to do. She closed the door gently, stood with her palm resting against the wood, and felt a surprising calm. Love, she realized, is not always proven by who stays. Sometimes it's in who you're willing to let walk away healthy. We'll see, soon enough, that this wasn't quite the end of their story. When the next storm rolls in, and the ridge tests her differently, what happened on this day, the choice to open the door and trust, will matter more than she knows. If you've ever watched someone or something you care about step back into their own life, even when it meant you'd be left standing in a quieter room, stay with this story. The ridge isn't done with Evelyn, and neither is the winter. By the time the second storm came, the ridge looked almost untouched, as if the last weeks had been erased and winter was starting over from the beginning. Snow fell heavily this time, thick, slow flakes that blurred the trees and swallowed the road in silence. Evelyn watched the plow crawl past at dusk, its lights like distant ships in a white sea, then vanish down the hill. The forecast promised another 12 inches overnight. Up here, that meant you're on your own for a while. She was halfway through washing her mug when the landline rang. It was late. The kind of late when even the radio sounds sleepy. On the other end of the line, a man's voice trembled just enough to tell her he was scared. His name was Tom. They'd called before. His grandson, a young man in his 20s, was burning with fever up at their cabin deeper in the pines. Labored breathing, confused. The truck was buried. No way out. Evelyn listened, that old familiar calm sliding into place over her worry like a well-worn coat. "All right," she said. "Keep him warm. Small sips of water if he can manage it. I'll come to you." The long road was already gone under drifts, but there was the older path, the one hunters used and kids once took on winter dare walks. It cut through the pines, crossed a narrow ravine, and wound up toward Tom's cabin. It wasn't official. It was real, though. People on the ridge have always trusted real more than official. She layered up. Wool socks, heavy boots, parka. The medical bag went on last. It felt heavier than she remembered, but maybe that was just her shoulders telling the truth her mind didn't want to hear. At the door, she paused, hand resting on the frame. For a second, she thought of Copper, the bobcat she'd let go back into the woods not long ago. How strong he'd been when he stepped over that threshold. How light her own body felt in comparison now. Joints clicking. Breath shorter on the stairs than it used to be. "Old bounds," she murmured, almost smiling. "New snow. We'll see who wins tonight." Outside, the world was a moving blur of white and black. Pines leaned in under the weight of snow, branches whispering to each other as the wind tugged at them. The trailhead was already half hidden, but her feet knew where to go. They'd walked people toward help and walked her home again more times than she could count. She moved slowly, planting each step, using her ski pole to test the ground. The air burned cold in her throat. Each breath sent a small cloud floating behind her like markers left along the path. The only other sound was the quiet squeak of packed snow under her boots. Halfway up, the ridge reminded her that time had passed. On a narrow shelf above a frozen creek, her boot hit an unseen patch of ice. The world tilted. The bag swung. She went down hard, one leg twisting under her in a sharp, unforgiving angle. Pain shot through her knee, hot, then nauseating. For a moment, the sky and the trees and the snow all smeared together. She tried to stand. Her leg folded. She ended up on one knee, breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The medical bag lay just out of reach, mocking in its uselessness. Her phone flickered between one bar and none. She tried to call Tom back. The line crackled, then dropped. Up here, there are places the signal just doesn't bother with. There, in that hollow, the ridge felt suddenly very big and she felt very small. It wasn't the first time her body had pushed back against her will. Stairs took more effort now. Lifting patients required more planning, but this was the first time the gap between what needs to be done and what I can do felt truly dangerous. She leaned against a tree trunk, snow seeping through her pants, knee throbbing in time with her heartbeat. Years of coaching others kicked in through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 4. Slow it down. Don't let panic grab the wheel. This can't be where it ends, she thought. Not dramatically, just plainly. Not halfway to someone who needs me. The forest seemed to listen. Wind moving through branches. Snowflakes are ticking against her hood. Somewhere deep in the trees, a sound shifted. Different from the storm's constant whisper. A faint, low note, like a throat clearing in the dark. She held her breath without meaning to. Listened harder. There it was again. A soft, familiar sound threading through the wind. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Something in between. On this ridge, sometimes help doesn't arrive with sirens or flashing lights. Sometimes it steps out of the tree line on 4 silent paws. In the next part, we'll see what, or who, was moving through those pines toward a stranded nurse. If the thought of an old promise circling back to meet you stirs something in you, stay close. The ridge is about to answer a kindness in a way Evelyn never expected. Out here, when something moves toward you in a storm, you expect headlights. Evelyn saw eyes. Not the flat glare of a truck, but 2 steady yellow-green points hanging just beyond the reach of her headlamp. Low to the ground, unblinking. Watching. She froze against the tree, one hand pressed to the bark, the other clutching her aching knee. Snow kept drifting down between them. For a moment, the ridge went very quiet. Just her breath, too fast, and the soft hush of flakes landing on branches. The shape stepped forward. A bobcat. Broad-shouldered now, winter coat thick, paws round and silent on the snow. Its head was level with her chest as it stood on the slope below. Muscles under that spotted fur, tail tip flicking in a slow, measured rhythm. Her first thought wasn't copper. It was every practical thing she'd ever learned. Bobcats avoid people when they can. They're not pets, and they don't come when you call. This could be any animal caught in the same storm she was in. Easy, she said quietly, more habit than plan. Her voice came out rough in the cold. You just keep going. I'm not here to bother you. The animal didn't bolt. It didn't rush her. It simply held her gaze for a long, steady moment. She could see its chest rising and falling, breath fogging faintly in the beam of her light. So different from her own, ragged and shallow. Then, in one slow motion, it turned. It stepped along the narrow shelf of snow, parallel to the thin line of her fallen tracks, and stopped a few yards away. Looked back over its shoulder. Waited. That was when she saw it. A small nick in the left ear, a tiny notch. She knew like she knew the scar on her own hand from a broken mug. Copper had gotten that mark, catching the crate door during one restless night in the clinic. She'd seen it up close in the half-light more times than she could count. Out here, in the middle of a storm, that same mark glinted in the headlamp's circle. Logic pushed one way. Wild animals don't come back to pay debts. A bobcat might pass near a human building if it remembers easy shelter or food smells, but it doesn't think in stories. It doesn't carry gratitude as we do. Something older pushed back. The memory of gently drying this animal's fur, of counting its breaths in the dark, of opening a door and letting him choose his path. The sense that the ridge keeps its own kind of ledger, one that doesn't look like ours, but still balances. Is it you? She whispered, not expecting an answer. Copper, she allowed herself the name now, took a few more steps, then paused again. His body angled into the trees, but his head turned back toward her, ears forward, as if checking whether she was coming. Her knee screamed when she shifted. The smart choice would have been to stay put. Try the phone again and wait for someone else to find her. But she pictured Tom's grandson up at the cabin, every hour of high fever tightening his chest. She thought of the way she'd taught others to push through pain, one small task at a time. "All right," she murmured. "You lead. I'll do my best." She used the ski pole like a crutch and rose inch by inch. Each step was deliberate, careful, and planted deep into the snow. Copper moved ahead at a pace that wasn't rushed, wasn't leisurely, somewhere in between. The kind of pace a tired human could just manage if they kept going. Every so often, he disappeared behind a cluster of pines. Her heart lurched each time. Then his shape would reappear, higher up the hill, waiting, tail flicking once before he continued. If you imagine this from his side, briefly, without words, you can picture it. A ridge he knows, paths he's walked in all seasons, a familiar scent on the wind from a place of warmth and strange safety. A human shape where humans don't usually stand. The memory of heat, of shelter, of a heartbeat that didn't hunt him. The trees began to thin. Ahead, through the moving curtain of snow, a faint orange glow cut the dark, the reflection of lights on low clouds. Then the sound reached her. An engine, laboring but steady, tires chewing at packed snow. They stepped out onto a narrow, plowed strip of ridge road just as an ATV rounded the bend, headlights sweeping over them. Caleb braked so hard that the machine skidded. "Evelyn!" he shouted, killing the engine, already half off the seat. "I've been up and down this trail looking for you. Tom's been frantic. What on earth are you doing out here?" She could have pointed to the tree line. She could have said, "Following a bobcat." But when she turned, all that remained were tracks leading back into the woods, already softening under new snow. Later, wrapped in blankets, knee-bound, riding on the back of that ATV toward the cabin, she watched the dark wall of trees slide past and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not that she'd been spared, exactly, but that life had met her halfway. It had moved through the pines on quiet paws, using the only language the ridge really trusts: presence, direction, shared distance. In our last part, we'll go back to the clinic with her, to the small bowl by the door, the candle in the window, and if this quiet return in the middle of a storm touches something in you. Come with us to the end of the story. The most just clearer, as if something that had been holding its breath finally let go. By the time Evelyn rode back from the cabin, the worst of the storm had passed. The young man up there was stabilized, fever coming down, breathing easier with medication and oxygen. Caleb helped her hobble up the clinic steps, grumbling gently about stubborn nurses and closed roads, then left her with a promise to check in at first light. When the door, she moved slowly, knee wrapped, body tired in a way that felt older than her years. Coat on the hook, bag on the counter, kettle on. Then she did two small things that said more than any speech ever could. First, she opened the back door and set a metal bowl on the top step. Into it, she placed a few pieces of meat, nothing fancy, just a simple offering to the tree line. Not payment, not a trap, just a wordless thank you from one breathing creature to another. Second, she lit the little candle on the windowsill that faces the lake, the same candle that had watched her bring a half-frozen bobcat in from the ice, watched her decide to open the door and let him go, and now watched her come home guided by tracks in a storm. The flame trembled once in the draft, then steadied, throwing a warm circle of light against the glass. Only after those rituals were done did she sit down with her laptop. The room around her looked the same. Exam table, cabinets, the faint antiseptic smell that never quite leaves a clinic. But inside, something had shifted. She opened a blank email and typed, "Hi, Rosie." The cursor blinked, waiting. How do you explain to someone who lives under city lights that the most important thing that happened to you this month involved ice, pain, and a wild bobcat who doesn't know your name? She began simply, the way you might tell a story over a kitchen table. She wrote about the morning on the frozen lake, the sound of claws on cracking ice, the decision to risk old bones for a small, cold life. She wrote about bringing winter indoors, About the first 72 hours when every breath from that crate felt like a tiny vote in favor of staying. She described Copper without trying to make him cute. Wary eyes, sharp paws, the way he never stopped being wild, even when he was wrapped in her care. She told Rosie about the day she opened both doors, the crate and the back door, and stepped aside. How watching that bobcat choose the ridge again broke something open in her, in the best possible way. A reminder that love is not just holding on. Sometimes it's the quiet courage to step back and trust the life in front of you to find its own way. And then she wrote about the storm, about slipping on the hidden ice, the shock of realizing her body had limits she couldn't simply push past, the cold pressing in. She described the moment when the forest sent not headlights, but eyes. How she almost didn't recognize Copper at first. How her training and common sense told her not to turn this into a fairy tale. Yet there he was, marked by that small nick in his ear, moving at exactly the pace she could manage, pausing just often enough to make sure she was still behind him. She didn't use big words like miracle. She talked instead about ledges the ridge might keep, about the way kindness sometimes circles back through unexpected messengers, on four paws, with whiskers, wearing a coat patterned to disappear in the pines. When she finished, she didn't try to explain the meaning to her granddaughter. She trusted the images to do their work. A nurse, a bobcat, a bowl on a step, a candle in the window, tracks in new snow. She hit send, closed the laptop, and sat there for a long time, just listening. The building breathed with her. The wind nudged at the walls. Somewhere outside, unseen, the ridge went on with its own quiet business. A few mornings later, she opened the back door to knock snow off the mat and saw them. Faint, rounded prints near the bowl, leading in from the trees and back out again. The meat was gone. The bowl had shifted an inch. She didn't step off the threshold, didn't call. She simply rested her hand on the frame and smiled, feeling that familiar combination of ache and gratitude. What they shared, this old nurse and this bobcat, was not a tidy fable. It was something more fragile and more real. A stretch of nights where two very different hearts kept each other going, and a storm where a life she'd once rescued helped her stand up and walk forward one more time. Before you click away, I want to gently turn this story toward you. Is there a Copper moment in your own life? A time when you reached out to help a wild or hurting part of the world and later found yourself guided, comforted, or steadied in return? Maybe it was an animal, maybe a person, maybe a place that held you when you needed somewhere to land. Take a breath and let that memory come to the surface for a moment. If this bobcat story on the ridge touched something in you, I'd be grateful if you'd tap like, leave a comment with your own quiet encounter, and subscribe so you don't miss the next night on this mountain. And if you feel called to go one step further, you can use Super Thanks or donate through the links below to support real-world groups that rescue and heal wild animals like bobcats and help them find their way back home. Your kindness might just be the reason another small set of tracks appears in fresh snow somewhere, circling back when someone needs it most.